Good stuff. Okay, welcome everybody to this month's .NET Liverpool. We've got Carole Logan here who's going to take us through Blazor and showing us how to get up and started with it. And before we do, I just want to give you a quick draw your eyes this little slide here about .NET Liverpool. We're part of the .NET Foundation, so you probably find there's loads in most cities now, especially in the whole of Europe. So if you go to our meetup page and you've got the connection there, you can see loads of other groups as well doing similar talks that Carole also talks at. But you can also look at things like our Twitter, our meetup page, got a YouTube channel where we're going to be recording this video for. It'll be on there, so you can catch up if you want to pick up on anything that you hear in this presentation. We've also got a GitHub account where we're doing things with Blazor as well. So we're thinking about making like a little bit of a portal where you can go in, leave feedback, and also if you've got like a job preference as well, like you're looking for a job, and we can help you try and find a job as well, because most meetup groups now are run by recruitment agencies. We're not. We're luckily sponsored by the lead agency. So the lead agency sponsor us, and usually if you ever came around to Liverpool and we didn't have COVID and the restrictions were listed a little bit high, we'd have food, a few beers, and a nice balcony overlooking the docks, which is absolutely beautiful. So hopefully one day soon I can invite you all down to Liverpool to join us, and especially Carole in the future as well, to a physical talk. But at the moment we're doing the best we can, and it's better than nothing. So just thank you all for giving it your evenings as well to come and join us. And what we want to do is in this portal as well, we're going to start doing raffles and stuff. But at the moment, it's all a manual process. So if you want to use these skills that you learned today, you can come onto our GitHub account and basically just help us build these things for the .NET community, as it's all open source. So thank you, the lead agency, for sponsoring our meetup group today. And also another sponsor is JetBrains. So we will be giving out JetBrains licenses, and I really recommend it. My JetBrains license ran out the other day, and the amount of pull requests I've had pushed back, and I don't even feel like a developer anymore. So the JetBrains licenses are absolutely fantastic. They will enhance your skills. They've got a great set of tools through code coverage to extensions. So definitely check them out. If you're interested in one of them, they can be expensive, about £60 or more. But we're giving away free licenses today for you lucky guys. So drop me a message if you're interested in one of them licenses. Like I said, they've got a few products. Have a Google and see what you think, and drop a message in the chat if you're interested. Another little meetup group as well, a little bit more hands-on, and they've had some great speakers such as John Skeet in there as well, and a few other hosts. But they're a little bit more tactical, where you can basically join this meetup and do some actual coding, join a group. I think we did something with Raspberry Pis last time we were there. So if you wanted to get away from the virtual presentations and you wanted to put a bit more hands-on, then you could join these little code ones. I was obviously, we've got some fantastic speakers, but it's a little bit different, this one. So if you want to check that out, we've got your Twitter and the meetup there you can have a look at. So just a reminder, just so I don't have to go away and edit this video all the time and spend all my weekend editing it. If you do want to contribute and speak up, just make sure no foul language, be nice to one another, and if you want to remain anonymous, please just turn your camera off and choose to do so. But if you don't want to be a participant in this recording, just drop me a message and we can take you out and edit you out. Okay, and I'll pass you over to Carole. Thanks, Carole. I'd like to welcome you.
Thank you. So I will try and share my screen, which is always fun on Zoom. Screen 2. Hopefully you'll see that now.
Yeah, see it.
Perfect, thank you. So thanks for inviting me along to virtually visit in Liverpool. I wish I could be there in real life, but maybe at some time soon I can be allowed to visit. Strangely never visited, even though it's so close. So I'm Carole, and I'm a principal engineer working on the .NET stack at a digital agency in Glasgow called Equator. And normally I will have to apologise for my accent if I'm speaking outside of Glasgow and that I might speak too fast, but the impression I get is in Liverpool you'll talk fast anyway, so it's fine. And if you want to catch me on any of the socials or on GitHub, then that's CR Grieve is on there, and my blog is on carole.dev. And please do say hello if you've got any questions or even just to chat about .NET stuff. And today we're going to chat, this is the agenda kind of roughly, but we'll take wherever the conversation takes us. But I'm going to chat a little bit about my history as a .NET dev, and please do chip in if yours is similar or not. A wee intro to Blazor and what the different types of Blazor are, because that's immediately one of the first things that you come up against when you look into Blazor. And we're just going to get started with a live demo. And then we're going to have a quick look at hosting and Azure static web apps, and then chat about what's next for Blazor, because it is just kind of the beginning at the moment. And if you've got any questions, do just pop them in the chat. Joshua, I might not see them, so just do come off mute and just jump in if there's any questions throughout. And it'll be interesting actually in the chat to see if this is the kind of route that a lot of y'all have seen as well. But I started working with .NET, some might say luckily, just after the web forms days. So I managed to just come in around about MVC time. So about 8 years ago, I switched from Java to .NET. And everything was kind of built MVC. That's how pages went from one page to another. It was through routing and MVC. And then we noticed a lot of things with web trends started to go a bit more towards single page app, which for me as a backend dev and a .NET dev generally meant web API. So I would build API endpoints generally to get data, to post data, to update data for single page apps, for example, in Angular and then React. More recently, I know some folks use Vue and there's all different things. So I'm sure that's a trend that a lot of folks have seen in the web in the last few years. So now when I saw that Blazor was an option within .NET land for single page apps, for me, this was, as a kind of dev lead, I always try and look at like what's next. So what might be the next step that we take, and particularly in the .NET stack. So for me, Blazor was really interesting as a thing to investigate, to keep up to speed with, to see if it is the new thing that we should be getting ready to use as a development team that uses .NET. So really this talk was built in my investigations of that. It was, how can I get started? How can I learn? And should this be a thing that the dev team will be using going forward? So if you've not had any introduction to Blazor yet, this is a good one that I found online, and I'll let you read it, but basically it's a HTML framework, similar kind of to Angular, React and Vue, that's used for rendering of .NET on the client side and runs using WebAssembly. We'll talk about the different options of WebAssembly or server later. And it offers all the benefits of a front-end framework, a modern front-end framework, while working entirely in C#. And that working entirely in C# bit was the winner for me. This is the meme that I like to use. It's like, I can't keep up with all these JavaScript frameworks. I went all in on Angular, really understood it, I liked it, and then it was time for React. And then when I learned React, it was time for Vue, and it's like, I just want to write C# in the browser. So let's see how we can do that. So I guess maybe the first question, if y'all are okay to kind of mention in the chat, has anyone worked with Blazor yet? Has anyone had a look into Blazor? Put your hand up or post it in the wee chat. But what it basically lets us do, if you haven't, or if you have, is we can write C# instead of JavaScript, and that is a generalization. What it actually lets us do is write C# and JavaScript, and we can call our JavaScript from C#, we can call our C# from JavaScript, and they work really well together. And we can leverage the .NET ecosystem of .NET libraries. And for me, this is a big one, where .NET developers, we've got the kind of go-to packages and libraries that we know and love and trust. And we can use these within Blazor apps. And we can share logic across this client and the server. We don't have to completely rewrite everything. There is some good examples out there if you do .NET. If you've got services already written in .NET and C#, you can then quickly port your app over to Blazor, depending how complex it is, when I say quickly, of course, and reuse a lot of that code. And we can benefit from like the performance, the reliability and security that we know we get with .NET. They've been working hard at this for a long time. And we can build upon a common set of languages, frameworks and tools that are stable, feature rich and easy to use, which it's the .NET framework that we've been working on for a long time. So there's all these kind of frameworks, and it's using C# language that's, you know, been around for a long time and is very well looked after and evolves every year. So you can see in the chat here, some folks have used server-side before WebAssembly was released, cool, and some folks never worked with it directly but played around a wee bit in your own time, which is similar for me, to be honest. Spoilers, I've not used it in production yet, but yeah, as I say, this talk is me learning. So the first thing, as soon as you look up Blazor, and someone's already mentioned it in the chat, client-side or server-side, what is the difference? Of course, apart from some of it's rendered client-side and server-side, but how does it work? So client-side, or it's also known as the WebAssembly version, is the C# code files and the Razor are compiled into .NET assemblies. And those assemblies and the .NET runtime are downloaded into the browser on load. And then the Blazor client-side bootstraps that runtime and configures it to load the assemblies for the app. And it runs at runtime, it uses JavaScript Interrupt to handle the DOM manipulation and the API calls. And there's a really good diagram that I'll show in a second that shows how that DOM is updated. Here it is. So this is right off the Microsoft Docs, but I think this and then the server comparison later is just a really good way to understand the difference. So as you can see, we're in a browser here. The Blazor app is within the browser itself, and you can see how it's updating the DOM there. It's actually the Blazor app itself is updating the DOM within our browser. And what's really interesting is it only updates the bits it has to. It doesn't completely update the whole thing. It just kind of does a diff basically and says, I'll just update that bit that I need to. And if you're not aware, WebAssembly, this is the kind of definition for it here, but it's the compact bytecode format optimized for fast download and maximum execution speed in the browser. And it's an open standard that's supported web browsers without plugins, which I think is a big one for us. You know, there's a kind of history of the web and using different server plugins and Flash and things like that. But this is a kind of open standard that the browsers do support and will support going forward. And the JavaScript interrupt is something you'll hear a lot when you read up on Blazor, and it means the WebAssembly code can access the full functionality of the browser via JavaScript, and the .NET code itself is run via WebAssembly in the browser using the JavaScript sandbox. So let's have a look at what the server-side Blazor, how that kind of works, and it's very similar. However, the server-side support for hosting Blazor components is an ASP.NET Core app, and the UI updates are actually through a Signalr connection. So we'll show how that looks in the diagram in a second, how it's different to how the WebAssembly one works. And the runtime handles sending the UI events from the browser to the server, applies any updates and pings them back from the server to the browser after updating the components. And similarly, that's how it updates the DOM that way using the Signalr and kind of changes that it sends back down. And the connection used by Blazor server-side to communicate with the browsers also used to handle the JavaScript interrupt call. So we still have that interoperability. And if you're not aware, this is what Signalr is. It's ASP.NET Core. Signalr is an open source library that simplifies adding real-time web functionality to apps. So like I mentioned, it lets us give that kind of real-time functionality to update the DOM. It doesn't look like the old-fashioned, I'll click on something, the whole page will reload and then it renders. It's kind of that real-time single-page app-like functionality. It makes it kind of dynamic. And here's how it looks a wee bit different. So you can see our browsers there on the right, and of course our DOM is still in the browser, but we can see our Blazor app is on the server and it's using Signalr, and that's how it updates the DOM. So I do find that those diagrams are quite a good way to visualize the difference between WebAssembly and Blazor server-side. And just to chat a little bit more about the pros and cons here, this is kind of out of the docs, and apologies for you're not meant to put this many words on a slide, so I'm sorry. But I think it's a good way for you to see the pros and cons listed here. So for server side, the download size is significantly smaller than the WebAssembly side, because therefore the app loads much faster on load, and the app can take full advantages of all the server side stuff we're used to being able to do with any .NET Core app. And So any existing tooling that we use for like debugging server side, we can use. Anything we use as .NET developers already, we can use. And it supports like thin clients as well, so that you can have Blazor server apps and kind of work with the browsers that don't support WebAssembly or in resource constrained devices as well. So it's less intensive on the actual device you're loading on. All the work goes to the server as you'd expect. And the C# code base, including like the kind of component code, it's not delivered served to client, so there's no DLL downloaded to the browser. However, the negative sides are there's higher latency exists kind of between the calls because it needs a network hop. It's not happening on the client side. It needs to make that Signalr connection. And there's no offline support because it needs that network connection. Scalability can be challenging for apps with many users. The server needs to manage multiple connections and handle the state because there's this kind of constant connection to the server. And an ASP.NET Core server is required to serve the app. So it's not possible to use like CDNs, for example. So on the WebAssembly one, you'll probably guess a lot of it's the inverse, right? So on the positives, like you don't need a server-side dependency. The app's fully functioning after it's downloaded to the client. So you can fully leverage whatever your browser you're on, the capabilities of it. You can use a lot of those native browser capabilities. And offline mode is available because you don't need that server connection, and you don't need an ASP.NET Core server to host the app. So you can use things like CDNs. On the negative side, it's restricted to the capabilities of browsers. So all the positives from the server side one about being able to kind of utilize all our server side and .NET tooling we can't do. It must have WebAssembly. So if you're using whatever browser you're in, must be one that supports WebAssembly. And into the future, that will just become more and more browsers, and it will just become standard. But there are still legacy ones that don't. The download itself is larger, so they take longer to load. So you will notice if you have a play around with server side and WebAssembly, the WebAssembly one takes longer to load, but is more reactive, kind of once the app's loaded. But the server side one loads quicker in the first instance. So it's kind of when you're architecting your application, like depends what the use case is, which one will be more appropriate. And the .NET runtime and tooling support is less mature. We probably more mature than most new frameworks because at least we've got all the stuff we already know how to use from being C# developers and .NET developers, but it's not quite as mature as what we're used to for, say, when we're working in MVC or in Web API. But that's the last one of those horrible slides with lots of text, I promise. We're just going to jump into creating a new project. So I am hopefully, now you'll see the PowerShell. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. No, a wee bit. Hopefully you can read that okay. So let's just jump straight in. So in the command line, we can do .NET new. So I'm going to go for a WebAssembly one here. So this is how we create a new Blazor app. And what you can do is you can do -h and it will list out all of the kind of helper parameters that we get, a helper for all the parameters that we can pass in, sorry. This is because I've left my PowerShell sitting for a while, I think. Here we go. Yeah, so we can see there's lots of different options. So it gives us all like the .NET new ones in general, and then gives us all the Blazor Web Assembly specific ones. So you can see here, I've got .NET 6 preview on this machine as well. I've got .NET 5, and you can see I've got .NET 3.1 as well. So it's going to default to .NET 6 when I do this, just because that's the latest one. And it will, I'm not going to go through them all, don't worry, but there's loads of different options you can pass into your command line when you're creating a new solution. And if you do Visual Studio create new and then use the Blazor templates, you'll basically get asked all these questions. So these are all those really helpful options that you get when you do file new in Visual Studio. You can say, yep, I want PWA, yep, I want this option, yeah, I want this option. And it does it all for you, so you can access all of those in command line as well. So if I say I'm going to create my new app and give it that name, and and it will create that for us. And I've got that folder open here. So fab, it's created. Step 1 complete. And it creates it here for us, and we can open that up in Visual Studio and have a look. And we'll take a little tour of what it creates in your app. Great. That's strange. Well, what I'm going to do is, I've done this yesterday on the same machine, so I'm going to open up my Visual Studio preview. Of course, it's opening on the wrong screen. I'll drag it over once it loads. Not sure what went wrong there, whether it's just because I'm kind of half using .NET 5 and .NET 6. I'm not sure. Usually it just lets us load it that way. But what I can do is I'm going to do create new. And I'll show you the other way of doing it. So that's the command line way with all those parameters. And we'll show you how you can create it within Visual Studio. So you'll see it's actually in my recent templates, but I'll show you, we can search in here and it will actually give you the 2 options. So in earlier versions, depending on what version you've got, it might just say Blazor app. And then on the next step, it will let you choose between server and WebAssembly. But in the more recent one, they've let you separate it out. So if I do this, and call it Liverpool demo, and go to next, you'll see all these same options that they had in the command line. We'll just get them asked in a nice UI now. So I'm going to go for .NET 5 this time. You can say HTTPS, you can say you want like progressive web app features as well. I won't go into it today because it's probably a whole topic in itself, but you can go for a .NET Core hosted version of WebAssembly and it creates you a kind of API and your WebAssembly side of things. I've not looked too much into that, if I'm honest. And you can choose authentication if you want, but I'm going to stick with none for now. So that will create our app for us. And when it does, I'll show you what a .NET Blazor app looks like with the template. So I'm sure, as with everyone who's worked with like MVC for years, you can spot that template a mile off when someone's used it as a starting point for a project. Blazor's a little bit like that. You'll recognize it. So here we go. I'm going to go into IIS Express even, and hopefully that will spin up for us. It's just building now. Oh, is it my global JSON that broke that? Oh, thanks for that. Thanks for sharing that link. The expected imports are missing. So it's going to load in here. And you'll see it. It's just a little loading screen, and then you'll see the app itself. There we go. And as you can see, it did go from loading to actually loading the app. It was a little bit of time in the background because it's the first time downloading it. And if you do have a bit of a play, like look in Browser Dev Tools and you'll see all that it downloads in the network tab, and then do the same for a server one, and you can compare. It's really geeky, but it's how I got to know how it works. Is hopefully you've seen how quick they're just to get this sample app up and running is one command line command. If I didn't get that error about imports, or just going through the wizard in Visual Studio, look how quickly we're able to get a WebAssembly one up and running. You can do the same with server, and I just literally had them both open on 2 screens and like compared for a while to see the difference. And it is great having these templates because they give us somewhere to get started with. So on the template, you get this home screen, hello world, and you get this little survey box. And you've got this counter app. As you can see, you click a button and it counts, very exciting. And then this one, it fetches data and puts it into a table here. So it's actually quite a good little demo that covers quite a lot of different parts of Blazor. So I'll jump into the code and I'll show you where each of those it kind of corresponds to. So we'll start off with your program CS, which is probably a good place to start. Hopefully, let me zoom in a little bit on this. And probably half of you can judge me that I'm using the light mode on my code. But apparently it's better for giving talks for accessibility. And for some people, you'll just be like, oh my God, I'm like, it's so bright, I can't read it. So here we are. It's Program CS, always a good place to start to see what the app's doing. And it's kind of got your WebAssembly host builder, and it's adding a component called app. And we'll have a look at that in a second. And it's also adding some services here for a HTTP client, which I'll show you where that's used in the code. And then it tells it, go off and run async. So let's jump into this app.razor then, since we can see that the root components is added app. And this is really just, you don't really need to worry about all of this, but I just want to kind of show you how to step through. So it tells it here to go and get the main layout basically. And if it can't get everything, if it falls into this not found, you'll see that it shows, sorry, there's nothing at this address. So in the shared is where you'll find that main layout. And you'll hopefully recognize a lot of this if you've done Razor before. It's the same kind of syntax. And this is basically the stuff that appears on every page that uses this main layout. So it's that kind of purple sidebar and the kind of shell of the website, if we want to call it that. And first of all, straight away, it shows us how we can kind of use components in Blazor. So that nice nav that we saw on the side is actually embedded here as a component. So let's jump in there. And as you can see, it's got our nav. And this is our first real look at how we actually do the C# in the browser. So we can see we've got all our HTML here, and then underneath we've got @code, and this is our code here. This is C# in our Razor file. But the difference between this and when we've got within our normal kind of MVC Razor apps is this actually has been running client side. And another important thing to look at when we're going through the demo is you can see here nav link. So this is the actual links within the nav, and it kind of gives a good hint at how routing works. So you can see we've got our nav link here, and it's linking href counter, and that's going to take us to our counter page, fetch data. That will take us to our fetch data page, and we'll show on each of those pages what hooks that link up to the actual route within the app. So let's have a look at our homepage, our index.razor. So we can see the route on this one. That kind of gives you a little hint of how routing works. App page, and then in quotes what the URL is. So this one is the homepage, so it's just nothing. It's just a slash. But this is the hello world that we saw, and the welcome to your app, and again it's showing you how you can add in a component, but what it's doing is it's actually passing in a property to the component. So you can see it's going to your survey prompt component, but pass in this title. So let me just find that there, the survey prompt. And as you can see here, within the @code, it's got the title. So this is the bit, as the demo gives you, it says it demonstrates how parent component can supply parameters. So yeah, the parent component, which was the index.razor, passes in the survey prompt with a title. So again, the demo does give like a little bit of a guide through all the different things you might want to do within Blazor. Let's get to one of the more interesting ones, the counter. At least it's doing something, it's incrementing that number. You can see here the button to increment. When we were clicking on that, you can see it's got this like on-click functionality. And this is where it starts to really show the stuff that we would normally do in browser if you're doing JavaScript, like the kind of on-click we would call JavaScript. This is an on-click function actually calling C# code, which I think is pretty cool. So it's got your increment count here. And on click, you should call increment count, and that's what it's calling there, is this method in your C# code. It's got your private void increment count, and it does current count ++, so it adds 1, and it adds it to that variable. And because that variable is what's been shown above the button, it just dynamically updates that. You'll notice in the demo when we pressed that, it wasn't reloading the page at all. It just adds one each time. It doesn't have to reload the page. So it's pretty neat little example of how you can have a C# method be called from your front end. And the last example within the demo here is was the data feed, and it doesn't actually go off and get from a real API. What it does is within the web root, it's got some sample data here in the demo, and it's a weather.json. But what it does in the demo is it mocks that with a HTTP client. So you'll remember way back in our program CS, we added that as a service that we can call. It means here in the fetch data, we can use that. And we'll skip down here first. Within the code, we can set up our forecasts object, and this on initialized is the interesting one. So this is the on page load essentially, and what it does is it goes and does an await and gets those gets from JSON, so it mocks down your API call, even though we're just getting it from the file, and it converts them to that object, and then it passes it onto the front end. So as you can imagine, we have to wait for that, and you're kind of dependent on what the third-party API call, if you are calling a third-party API call, how quick it can respond to you. So what you can do is, you'll notice here within the kind of Razor syntax that we're used to, we can do a null check for it, and we can basically say, do I have that data yet? No, I'll just say loading. And then when the data becomes available, it renders out that table that we saw. So that's quite nice that it does this dynamically. We can do on page load, it can show loading, and then automatically the DOM updates what's on screen when it returns from this async. When that object is updated, basically it knows on the front end to stop showing loading and to show the actual table. So again, I think that's a really nice example of something we'd realistically want to do within our single page app is call an API, because as we discussed earlier, a lot of the single page apps is to give that dynamic kind of functionality on the front end while still calling APIs and back end logic. And you can hear, oh, sorry.
Sorry, we've got a good question from Alexis here about the shared folder. So does it have to be in this structure, or can you move the folder structures around to meet your needs?
Good question, actually. I would assume it's going to be a bit like an MVC where we can move it around and do what we need, but we can give it a go and see. I haven't tried, to be honest, but say we want to have, like, because there's the shared folder, which I think having the nav and the layout in makes sense, but maybe we want the survey prompt in a maybe we want to have that in a separate folder called components or something, eh? Let's do that and put that there. Cool, and we'll rebuild, and then we'll run it and we'll see if it works. But I do think it's mostly like best, like it's kind of shown away for the demo, but I do actually think it will be like MVC, where you can put stuff in whatever folder that you want, and it will kind of search for that specific partial. I don't think it's naming convention based, but we'll see. Oh no, so it's not there. Interesting. It's all working fine there. You can still see that, but there we go. So let me remember if that was namespaced. Let's have a little look together. What was that? It was in here, wasn't it? Ah, interesting. Ah, cool. So this is, we still have to put a using in. So we didn't have to for shared, I guess, because that was, we were already using stuff that was within shared. But to use any new ones, we have to do using and the new folder that I've moved it to. So I've moved it to components. So I have to say using. this namespace dot components. That'll work this time.
Excellent. And just to confirm, Carole, is that your IDE doing that? Do you have any extensions, or did that automatically just find it?
That was just Visual Studio. I don't have any extensions, so that just done that for me. Let me take that out. Actually, I kind of glossed over that. So it gives us our little squiggly lines of doom, and it's basically saying found a markup element that of survey prompt. If it's intended to be a component, use an app for that. But what I can do is like control dot in Visual Studio, and it gives me recommendations. So it's basically saying create a component from that, or we can see that there's something called survey prompt in another folder. So it gives me the option to do @using, or it would give me this option to namespace it, but I don't really like that. That makes it look a wee bit messy. So I'll go for this option here. So one interesting thing, and say interesting with many meanings, is it didn't fail my build, and it didn't even give me an error on the app itself, did it? It just didn't show the component, which for us as .NET developers is probably a bit interesting, because we're used to Visual Studio or MS Build in general saying, no, there's an error, we can't find survey prompt, so we're not going to build. Do you want to use your last build? But within Blazor, it's like, yep, cool, on you go. Load the page, we're just not going to show the component. So it's things like that that it takes a bit of getting used to. But I guess if you're already doing front end stuff, sometimes that would happen anyway. So there you go, it's back. That was a good question. Some kind of live refactoring.
Carole, one more question on top of that, actually, because that's actually quite interesting, isn't it? Because obviously, as you scale out these big apps, if you make one change, how can you guarantee that you've not broke anything in any of the other components? Is there like a way to see like warnings or anything like that?
I'm not sure, to be honest. Is anyone here, if anyone who has used Blazor had experience of how you can deal with that? Because I've not used it in production or for real applications. It's mostly just been for fun. Joshua, in your .NET Liverpool Blazor repo, have you found a solution for that?
I'm not. I'll actually do some research and I'll put it in the chat if I find anything.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it'd be good. It's one of those. It's just, as much as there's a lot of this, is it comes on to some of the learnings chat that I've got later. There's a lot that we know, we've got a real good head start as .NET developers on Blazor, but it is still a new framework, a new way of working, with these tools and expectations of how we find errors or warnings or things like that. It's all totally different than our usual workflow, and that's why I find doing this research and just playing around and moving stuff into different folders and seeing if it breaks and things like that is like a really powerful thing to do without the pressure of doing it on like a client project or on a real life project. So that's a bit of a quick tour around the WebAssembly Blazor app, and what I would recommend is do that. Also do it for the server one, and as I mentioned, compare the folder structures. There are so many similarities, a lot of similarities between Blazor WebAssembly and Blazor Server. Just a few things are different, and you'll be able to find those having a look. Because they are so similar, and you can, so when I've got this code, for example, in here, that's got my HTML and then it's got my code at the bottom, it pretty much looks the exact same when we're doing it in the server version. So if you decided to start WebAssembly and move to server, or the other way around, it's not a full rewrite. I've done demos before where I've done some kind of custom code on the WebAssembly one and then ported it over to the server one, and it's pretty much copy and paste. It's like famous last words for a developer, I realised that. But there's a lot of similarities there, which is great. And just what I thought I could show is how we can quickly host a Blazor app. And I don't know if anyone has had a look at static web apps within Azure, and they just launched on general availability just this last week, I think. They were in beta before that, or preview. And they start from free for kind of like hobby sites or test sites. and it lets you deploy serverless web apps fast with global reach and scale as the headline. But basically, Blazor Web Assembly is one of the kind of core examples that they use, and I'll show you when we set it up. There's actually like specific templates for it. They make it real quick to get started. So I've got a little in GitHub. I've got a little .NET Liverpool Blazor, which is just using the WebAssembly one that we done earlier. So if I go and show you this in code spaces, I'll show you it's the exact same app. And this basically loads an instance of Visual Studio Code within the browser. Basically, you'll recognize it in a second. And it's a good example to show you don't need to use Visual Studio for developing in Blazor. You can use Visual Studio Code. So here we are in my folder. To change to the right directory, and then onto .NET WatchRun. And because this is like .NET 5 now, you can do WatchRun, which is really good. It basically lets you run your app, but it listens out for changes and it will make them for you in the browser. People that have done a lot of JavaScript development and front-end development are probably like, that's not that exciting, Carole, but it is when you're a .NET developer, because we've never had that luxury, so it's exciting. So I'm in code spaces, and it's really great because it lets you open up your app within the browser like you're working locally, which is really sweet. So here it is, the same app, I promise. And we can make live changes just to show you how .NET WatchRun works. I can see. I can change our hello message. If I go back to my terminal here, you'll see that it done another build there for me because I made changes. I didn't have to type .NET WatchRun or .NET Run. I just had to make a change, and it sensed it, and it done another update for me. So if I go back to my browser and refresh it, it should have my changes there, which is really nice. I just thought I'd show that because as updates to .NET development kind of workflows, it's a really nice one. So we can, so what we're going to do is how we can host this, right? So that's in our GitHub repo. And we're going to use static web apps. So you can get that within the Azure portal. I've got an example here already, but let's set up a new one. Things take longer when you're doing a demo, don't they? To load. But this should let us set up an example. Has anyone had a look at static web apps yet within Azure? I'll send this link in the chat and to have a little read at it, but it might be, again, I've not used it in production yet, but it might be useful for some folks. Why is it not? Can you all see that browser window, yeah?
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah, fab. Let's have a look and see if it works this time. So what normally happens is it will load an interface that lets you configure your Azure static web app, and it works hopefully with this load because it's a really nice demo of how quickly you can connect it to GitHub, and it automatically creates your YAML file. Oh, here we go. It's going to let us. Brilliant. So I will say. Not so catchy title, and there's a different plan type, so I'm going to go for the free one. I'll go for West Europe, and I say I'm going to let it work with GitHub, so let's hope that my single sign-on works. Wow, that's opened in a big window. Oh, why is it? That's strange. I don't know why this one's opening so late. 2 seconds. that not working? That's strange. So what it should do, don't know why it's not working here, is it will let you integrate with your GitHub account, and it lets you pick the exact repo that you're working from, and it creates the YAML file for you. So let me just see if I can find the example repo that it already works, and I'll show you the file that it creates because it's really great. Great, I've got an example here. I'll show this one because when it all works together, what it does in the background is it creates this YAML file. Hopefully you can see my browser again. It creates this automatically. I don't need to write this. No one likes writing this stuff manually. Surely, tell me I'm wrong. And what it does is it automatically hooks up your Azure Static Web App with the GitHub token and all of that lovely stuff. And when there's a pull request merge or when there's something pushed, it automatically does this GitHub action. And it will basically update. So this one was called Blazor app. That was the name of the folder. So it automatically outputs it to there. So if I go back, this is this Blazor example that's up and running, I think previously, one I made earlier. I can go here and load it. And there we go. So that was a code spaces example. So we can, as soon as something is merged into our repo here, you can see here it automatically runs. So there's a couple where it failed when I was doing some examples, and there's a couple where it passed. And it automatically, as soon as I pushed in that code, it done my deployment up to my Azure Static Web App. So you can create it in the portal, you can hook it up to your GitHub repo, it creates your YAML file within there, and it automatically starts deploying it out to your server, and then it's available. It's available on this Azure Static Web App URL, and you can just straight away, that's you got your CI/CD pipeline, just from hooking up your GitHub repo to Azure Static Web Apps for free. So it's really good for Blazor. I wish the example it worked, because after the step where you choose your GitHub repo, you can choose the template for what kind of static web app it is, and there's a Blazor template there, and then it asks you for that part of the YAML where I showed you the folder that's like namespace that it's in. That's it asks you for that as well, so you don't even need to go in and change it in the configuration. It's right there. And one really nice feature of static web apps is when there's an open pull request, if you can make that okay here, when there's an open pull request against the linked repository, it automatically creates like a staging static web app for you. So I've got an open pull request here. So yeah, there's an open pull request here. And it automatically, because this is an open pull request, I can see that here within my staging environment. So I've got my main environment, which is the one that I showed you, and then there's this one here. You can open it in a browser as well. So you could, like, as well as review the code in a pull request, you can actually go and see how it runs. Like, does it actually break the app, or does it keep running? And here you go, you can see that the one from the pull request is up and running on staging, and it's still working. I've not broken anything, hopefully. And then that could let you even more confidently merge that pull request, because you've not only reviewed the code, you've actually tested that it works. So yeah, I thought that was quite a nice example. And nice, and it's good that it's free as well, because it just makes it a bit better for those like sample projects, or those like playing around, or like hobby projects, So a little bit about what I've learned, and it would be great to hear what other folks that have used Blazor have learned. It's really quick to start building, really quick for me to file new and have a look around. I know Razor, I know C#, I know .NET, so it wasn't so scary for me to jump in as maybe when I start to learn Vue or something like that in JavaScript side. This was more when I was looking at it when it was in preview before .NET 5, but things were changing quite often. Things were moving. I would look at it, and then on the next preview, I'd be like, hey, who moved that thing? That thing's called something different now. Because it is a new framework, it's changing quite often, which is good. It's for performance, it's for all kind of developer experience and all these things, but things are moving quite quickly. Even from .NET 5 to 6, I know that there will be quite a few changes. In the dev community, for me, anything that's going to be a successful framework or language or anything like that needs to have a kind of big community around it, and an active community. You should have a look at this community here on Awesome Blazor. They maintain a list of cool tutorials for Blazor, videos for Blazor, integrations, packages, and like even cool like examples of where it's been used in production. And for me, this is really positive. It's showing that there's people out there using it, creating content for it, and will really help for adoptability as developers for this technology. Because let's face it, there's nothing worse than when you Google the problem and you can't find the answer, and no one's written about it. And hosting, like I mentioned some of the pros and cons earlier of WebAssembly versus server, and there are different options. So you can see if you do the publish option within Visual Studio, you get a lot of these options that we know and love, that we're used to. You can still deploy it in ways that we normally can as .NET developers. And as I've shown you, static web apps. There's another really cool example. I'll find the link and I'll send it, where you can, the WebAssembly version, you can actually host on GitHub Pages, because there's no server side. It's just kind of static web app, which is really cool. I think that's really nice. So even if you don't want to set up your Azure static web app, you can set it up from your GitHub Pages. But there are, I don't know if it's updated since I tried, but this tutorial takes you through. There's a few little hacks that you have to do to get it to work, but it's 15-20 minutes and it's fine. So for me, the big question is what's next? What is next for Blazor? Where's it going? Because it's really only launched at .NET 5. Well, I'll correct myself. WebAssembly version only really launched with .NET 5. So more progressive web app type features, you did see when I ticked the box in Visual Studio that there is support for progressive web app, but as I understand it, there's going to be more kind of hybrid apps and native apps as well. And then kind of Blazor Desktop, as I understand it, with .NET 6 is going to be, as the next step, the next slide says, is kind of going to be something that's going to heavily focused on. I've not looked into it. I have looked at some .NET 6 stuff, but I've not looked at Blazor Desktop yet, so I will definitely need to have a look. And there's going to be more focus on the WebAssembly performance side. So I did mention earlier in the pros and cons, there is the kind of initial load time of the WebAssembly version is a bit of a thumbs down, but hopefully if they can improve that performance in many ways, like that'll be a real step forward. And yeah, developer adoption of Blazor is the big thing for me. I'm really looking out for who's using it and are people talking about it, and is it going to be the next big thing? If I go way back to that slide at the start, where I said, I kind of saw things go from MVC to using Web API with the new cool JavaScript framework of the time. Is Blazor going to be the new thing? I don't think we know yet. We're not quite sure. Is it going to be another Silverlight, or is it going to be something that's around longer term? It's going to be used by developers. There's going to be a community we see in the future. But what I think we can see from the .NET side, from the Microsoft side, is there's a lot of effort went into the previews of it, getting a lot of feedback during preview, and even between 5 and 6, there's going to be a big jump and making sure there's performance additions, that there's going to be more kind of developer experience type things, and kind of getting it up to speed with what we need it to be as a framework for the future. So I think I'm really optimistic about it not being one of these things that just disappears, but I guess only time will tell. and I'll send a link to some of those resources that I've referenced throughout my slides. But I guess over to y'all if there's any questions. That's a good. I can see there's a question there actually. I'll put you back on the screen now. Around the hot reload. I don't know because I've not tried yet. I know build was yesterday, and kind of seen about the hot reload feature. I've not tried yet. Has anyone here tried? No, no. I've not got the preview yet, or I would do it live just now. I'm going to download the preview probably after this. Actually, I'm just not. I didn't want to download a preview right before doing a demo, just in case I broke stuff. Yeah, it does look cool, Alexis. I'm excited to see it, like in real life, in my own machine. Any other questions or feedback, or if you've used Blazor? Debugging on the client side, good question. I think like you can put breakpoints within your C# code within the client side, but it's not quite as kind of on that pros and cons list. It's not quite as advanced as what we're able to do when we're working server side, when we're working in our MVC apps. But I do think it's one of those things that as the tooling will grow, as the framework grows, and as more people are using it, and as they add more and more of these features, that it does seem to me like they have focused on developer experience for it, as well as as a framework, like to make sure that it's easy for developers to adopt and to work with, because that's the only way like a framework lives and dies with that, right? If it's really performant but rubbish to develop for, people still won't use it.
You have one there as well. Do you have any course recommendations for learning?
Let me find it. I'll send it on the chat. There is a Microsoft Learn. There is a Microsoft Learn course, module, I think they call it, for it. And there is the docs, which again, I'll post a wee link to. I just followed the docs. You know, those ones I got those nice screenshots from. The Microsoft docs are really good, explaining the difference between the two, run you through tutorials. And yeah, Microsoft Learn does have a module to run through for Blazor as well. And I do think, and I know it's really easy to say, just jump into the example, but I think those templates, like I showed you, you can, click a few buttons and get a really good template up and running. For me, that was the best way to just see how it works, see how it ties together. And that little tour I wanted to give of, okay, we're in Program CS. Where does it go? Okay, app. The app, where does it go? Okay, it goes to the main layout, and so on, and just figure out how it's all hooked together so that when we break stuff, we can see how we can fix it. But using those two templates is really the best way for me to be able to see how things work. But I know different people learn differently, and you can check out if you go, like, I know it's a kind of a classic suggestion, but see if you do hashtag Blazor on Twitter, you'll find loads of people sharing resources, Twitch streams, YouTube videos, just whatever way you learn. If you learn best by watching someone else do it on a video, then get a video of it. If I like to do real life examples myself and follow tutorials, so whatever way works best for you, but I will share some links. Oh, it's cool. David's saying they piloted server side before WebAssembly was available. You've not gone back and tried WebAssembly yet. Well, hopefully you do. Let us know if you do have a look at it, if it's helps fill the gap that you needed on it. But I do think it's promising. I've not used it in production yet. I've not had a reason to really make the call of, hey, do we use Blazor? But it's something I'm making sure to keep tabs on, and getting to do talks like this is great because it makes me come back to it every few months and see what's changed and see what the new developments are with it. So Joshua, are you ready to do your .NET Liverpool app now in Blazor and host it as a static web app? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. I did. You know what? I did a Blazor app about a year ago, and I did server side and I did client side, and then I've not touched it for a while. And the stuff that you've been saying in that presentation, it just brought everything back. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about client side and server side Blazor. And yeah, started coming back. So definitely want to have a little play with it. And it's just nice, isn't it, just to use all the features? Because as a .NET developer, you know, you're going onto like .NET Framework 6.9 preview, and you see all these nice little features, and it's just really nice just to wrap them together and to keep with that framework. And you know, I think the community is really nice as well. You were saying about course information. I think there's Pluralsight as well. I think there's a few Pluralsight courses on there. I think you get 30-day free, and YouTube's packed as well with some really nice examples, and GitHub examples from some speakers on there as well. And yeah, it's just great to get content. So this will be on YouTube as well to get started. So
yeah, and I've posted. There's Blazor Day. What's the date of it? I'm speaking at it, I should know. 17th of June is Blazor Day conference. It's an online conference about Blazor. If you go to blazorday.net, and there's like loads of talks there. So I'll be giving this getting started one, but there's loads more advanced ones as well if you're ready to look into like different parts of Blazor. And there's some really great speakers there talking about all things from like using components, component-based working within Blazor and all different things. So yeah, do definitely jump in and have a look. And there's one about just having a look there. There's like testing tools and stuff like that for Blazor. So all of those questions that we've got around like how can we do testing, how can we follow like our usual workflows, hopefully they'll get answered throughout that day on Blazor Day.
That's fantastic. As far as the video goes, just for our recording purposes, we're going to carry on and have a little bit longer chat off the recording. So do click that button, like and subscribe, and check out Carole Logan's GitHub, Facebook. Check her out. She's been on MSN Build as well, so that's been recent, hasn't it, Carole?
Yeah, Build was just yesterday. So there's loads of videos on there. If you go on MS Build, search for MS Build, you'll find like the keynote that's got that hot reload. We probably should have given that context. That was from the keynote yesterday, and someone mentioned in the comments. And yeah, just loads of cool .NET stuff and Windows stuff and Azure stuff, all announced. So it's exciting times.
Fantastic stuff. So like and subscribe, guys, and I'll see you all next month.